What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to do another behind-the-scenes video. I'm going to discuss some various elements about ACG, about Karak, about games, and just my overall love for them. So if you guys saw the original video that I did for this, basically I discussed all of the different things that sort of made up how I got to where I got, but that is a very small overall amount of the things that have sort of made me me, just like you guys. As I've stated before, everybody's sort of a puzzle piece of pieces for every single day, and a new puzzle is added for every day that you live, and a new thing is learned or unlearned, depending on what kind of person you are. So I want to talk about a couple things, and this is going to be a sort of a rampage of random, so you really have to be prepared, because there's so many things in my brain right now when it comes to different elements, when it comes to games and their elements and their aspects, that I'm just going to be bouncing around a little bit. But there's some reasons why, and I'm going to get to that at the end. The first thing I want to do is express some love for a couple games and express to you why I like them, and then move from there so that you understand exactly how I go about comparing other games to them, or just what's in my brain. The first is Alan Wake. Now, it's very difficult for me to really describe to you how much I like Alan Wake, but let me sort of break it down into the basics that are easy to explain and then jump into the more detailed elements. For me, one of the things I liked so much about Alan Wake was its more American-styled horror story. Now, a lot of people right now especially are into the more Japanese horror stories. Japanese horror has taken over with The Grudge and The Ring and all of those things really sort of blossoming out and sort of alerting people to different horrors from different nationalities, which I absolutely love. I think those are great. But Alan Wake came at a time when I felt that it was really heavy on one side, and we weren't getting some really good overall Americanized style horror. And of course, Alan Wake certainly does bear more than a passing resemblance to things like The Dark Half, which of course is a Stephen King actual book about a protagonist and his ghostwriter that basically comes alive, or his alter ego that comes alive when he tries to kill him. It's not exactly the same, but you sort of get that duality that occurs in Alan Wake. Why do I like it so much? You know, it's not only the fact that it is more of an American style plot, and that means you can discuss things. Things aren't just weird for weird sakes many times. Many of them are sort of a 1, 2, 3 element, which of course I think the 1, 2, 3 element is why some people don't like certain nationalities of horror right now, certain places where they're coming from, because they look at it and they're like, I'm not going to really be surprised by what happens here. I get that completely, and I understand it. And in fact, I embrace the fact that this one game did something that I think a lot of people expect to be sort of basic, and ended up doing it so well. I think that's also why I do like Alan Wake, is because what it does is it returns to basics, and it delivers a plot, and it delivers a continuity, and it delivers a story in a basic way, but it does really well with it. You know, some of the greatest platformers we've ever played, some of the greatest shooters we've ever played, some of the best driving games we've ever played have been distilled down, even though the rest of the genre at that time might be going a different way, going with complexity and so forth. And you get this game where you're like, holy crap. I would say Shadow Warrior is a good example, at least of a reboot, even though, you know, it existed prior, but where it comes in to a time where there was all this complexity and all of these extra things added, and they're like, no, seriously, here's a sword, just kill a bunch of people. Duke Nukem is another good example of that. And you have different racing games that are examples of that, where they're pure distilled arcade, or they're a mixture, or they're really complex. With Alan Wake, it came in and it was a little bit more basic. It was a little bit more, here's some places to explore. But there's another reason why I like Alan Wake, and that's that the technology that created it, the technology that actually did not get shown in the end result, which is Alan Wake, more of a linear slash barely open world style game, really does adjust the way I feel about the title. For example, Alan Wake, as we know, if you guys watch my walking the walk of that title, is actually an open world engine, and then they've sort of pared it down to linear spaces. So what that means is you can travel in this game, this horror game, for a great deal of time and turn around and see where you were, and it's in actual game graphics. It's actually there. It's not a painting or a level that's loaded. One of the reasons why I really like that is because so many times the feeling of past and present past sort of break up when you look at particular titles, especially horror titles, where it's like, oh, I'm going into this mental asylum, they're locking the door, there's going to be a boss battle, and then I'm going to move on. Alan Wake had a couple of those, but for the most part, the level progression, as you walked through them, you could always look back and feel that sense of past. And that sense of past was never really, I would say, interrupted by any kind of true loading door. You know, it happened sometimes when you went to the lodge and so forth, but even the lodge was massive. And you had this feeling, an overall feeling of open worldness. When you come down into the Rock and Roll Brothers stage and you start so far back and you basically work your way through the forest, across the road, all the way down through the fields into this house, there's a feeling of dread and melancholy that sort of build as you're traversing. It isn't in your face as much as a lot of games are, Evil Within and so forth, where it's like, boom, this is a bad guy right here, go forth. Instead, there's a somber tone to it, a more, I would say, eclectic tone, even though it's a more basic game. And I like that. And it's one of those titles that the longer I play it, the more times I play it, it's one of those ones that you can discuss with friends and you can be like, you know, what exactly happened here to you? And it doesn't always have to be moments of action against bad guys with triangle pieces of steel on their head. Nothing against Silent Hill, but a lot of games sort of degenerate into that in their discussion, and there's a more nuanced discussion that I think can happen with Alan Wake that sometimes finds some difficulty happening with others. Now, this doesn't mean it's a perfect game. There's issues with the mechanics, there's issues with the guns, and some people didn't like how many bullets you got, some people did, some people didn't like the flame or the flare kind of mechanic, and some people did. It just sort of went back and forth. But to me, there's a love there that I really can't describe. And I think that a lot of you, if you have that particular title out there that you really, really like, and you try to describe it to somebody and maybe they're like, nah, I don't like it. And you're all, okay, whatever. That's pretty much me with Alan Wake. I'm like, okay, I get it. We've passed the time where it was popular. There's a lot of us who maybe want a sequel. It's probably a game that won't get a sequel because of just how Remedy works and, you know, trying to push forward, and it didn't do incredibly well. It did well over the time period, but it didn't do insanely well. You know, I would love a sequel for that. I would love a game that is built like that. I like those kind of things. And in fact, I certainly feel that there's some similarities, very, very basic ones, to things like Twin Peaks and X-Files. And I think that that also is what grabs me. There's a little bit more of a serialized kind of feel to it, and I love it. I also love those breaks where it'd be like, last time on Alan Wake. It felt like the chapter breaks when you moved on. It gave you little snippets of what had occurred before, and there was something about it, like I said, where you could look back and you could feel that past feeling, and it wasn't always just quick twitch, it wasn't always just moving super fast. It was sometimes a more cerebral thought process, which I definitely give them kudos for. Some other games that I really, really absolutely adore is KOTOR. Now, with KOTOR, I'm going to do a walking the walk of KOTOR. I'm probably going to do a review of it for the patrons, a classic review. The discussion about KOTOR always goes in multiple different facets. You know, did it have its issues? Yes. Is it a different style of battle systems that maybe we won't see ever again? Absolutely. But why do some people like it so much? And I have to say, for me at least, whenever I find myself really liking a role-playing game, usually what I can distill that down to is the fact that it allows me to feel as close to Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing as I possibly can. And that's a mixture of narrative, and it's a mixture of the camera view even. It's just a mixture of how the entire game came together. With KOTOR, I've talked about this in my Manan versus the Cradle video, where I discussed two video game levels that were dramatically different, but why I liked them so much. So if you get a chance, you might want to go back and check out those videos. The thing about KOTOR to me is the fact that I can play it multiple times, and there's just enough variation there. There's just enough choice that it feels a little bit fresh every single time, and it feels like not necessarily a lived-in world, because it doesn't. In fact, it's got some of the weaknesses that hub worlds do have. But there's a feeling to it of choice and choice mattering. And it's not like some other games I've talked about where every choice hurts. It's not that kind of melancholy, but it certainly does have a more dreary feel to it, regardless of who you're sort of dealing with, whether it be the dreams that you yourself are having, or whether it be the issues with the different people in your party and how they interact. There's something very next level for that, and something that I really, really enjoyed. And I feel that when it comes to KOTOR, the camera angle really did help it. You know, we see a lot of games like, let's say, Fallout going from isometric to a 3D, you know, first person and third person kind of view. With KOTOR, you had that third person kind of view that was a little bit close, but it sort of adjusted depending on what you were doing, and you sort of got that feeling of action as the character leapt forward. I'm going to do a walking the walk on just cameras here in a little bit about engines and camera and camera choice and so forth. I think that was really well done in KOTOR. But I think KOTOR also explored a time that at that point wasn't explored in video games, which was really the Old Republic. And what happens is you open up that fiction for people to make choices that don't feel preordained. It's very difficult to be a Jedi in the Luke era when you realize that Luke is supposedly the main Jedi. And you're like, yeah, whatever choices I make are going to be sort of secret. You know, we had some games, Force Unleashed did a fairly good job hiding that character in the narrative and pretending like he was a secret agent and that a lot of people didn't know about him. And I thought that was fairly well done. But with KOTOR, you're in the old republic. You're in a place where that is a much broader spectrum for you to make choices and deal with things. It's also something that I've talked about in narrative in games really bothering me and in books bothering me that they don't do in KOTOR. And what that is every single fucking game seems to feel that it needs to be the end of something. It's the last dragon. And I don't mean the martial arts one. I mean Dragon Slayer. It's, you know, the last somewhat powerful wizard. It's the last this. It's like, oh, these used to exist. Few games, movies, or anything really likes to jump into the super powerful times. The times when there were tons of wizards or there were tons of dragons. Because, of course, it is difficult to generate a narrative of specialness if everybody is that. But to me, when you do that, when you're able to generate a feeling of narrative and specialness around a character, then you actually feel even more empowered than if you're just the last one. You know, you're the chosen one. What was great about KOTOR is the fact that when you're playing it and you're making these choices and you're engaging within the game world, you're making choices with in an area where everybody is. There's some fairly highly powerful people here, and they're powerful in their various different elements. There's powerful factions as well, and you get to interact with some things that have never really been discussed or never really been showed in movies and books before. And I really did dig that. And they had some world-changing events, but not too many of them. You know, one of the things that a lot of role-playing games do is they'll throw a ton of world-changing events at you. And once you change all these things, no one really reacts to it, or there's a canned kind of reaction where you realize they're just sort of taking some of your choices. It's like creating a character at Mass Effect. I think it was 2 because that wasn't on the PS3, and you just sort of chose some things. Like, what did your shepherd do? Those kind of situations. But what happened in KOTOR is you had a couple massive ones, and they were interspersed with the personal ones that you had. You had the Kolta factory on Manan, which is probably one of the best overall story arcs I think I've ever witnessed. And I talked about this again in that video that I did where I discussed Manan versus the Cradle in Thief 3. So when you look at Manan, you look at this game where there's ever concentric circles of questing, and the questing sort of ramps up slowly and gives you hints and foreshadowing of the choices that you're going to make later. But what's really great about this is it's that choice that you make at the end has all of the other choices ingrained into it. And in fact, depending on how you play that particular planet, you can actually make one series of somewhat like-minded choices, pretending to play an alignment, for example, and then get at the end and go, oh crap, I can't continue this. I have to make this other choice, because the way they frame that last choice, the way they frame what's happening, there isn't really a win situation there, but there certainly is multiple different choices you can make that sort of unalign you from the choices you made previously. Now, a lot of people may look at that and be like, well, that's a weakness. That's not story continuity. No, in fact, it's very much story continuity. That's what happens in real life as well, where we make choices day in and day out that we think align us to some future goal. We get to that future goal and the goal is different now. Or when we get to that goal, we're like, oh, this isn't quite exactly what I wanted. And not only were the past decisions we made leading up to that goal a part of the goal itself, but also they may have adjusted it so that if we get what we want, it's actually not going to be as good anymore because of the choices we made prior. I don't want to give too much away about that game because I will be doing a review of it, and I might even do a full walking the walk of all of KOTOR, but there's just some fantastic stuff. It leaks over, I would say, into other games, but not so much, or into other levels, I'm sorry, but not so much. That planet in particular just really seems nailed down, really seems to understand how to take a hub world and make it feel like an open world. So jumping from games for a second, let's talk about hub world versus open world. This is something we've discussed on the podcast multiple times, and I've never really got a chance to explain my reasoning for some things because, you know, a lot of times we're just bouncing off each other, getting our ideas, and it's great because most of the time we always agree, or if we disagree, we understand where somebody's coming from. But it's difficult sometimes to go into in-depth communication with the watcher and with the viewer and really sort of explain something. So when it comes to hub versus open world versus linear, A lot of people ask me what I like the best, and of course, you will always get this from me. I like whatever works for that game, of course, but I do think that there's some strengths to hub worlds that aren't actually discussed very often. I want to discuss that for a second. Let's say you look at a game that's linear. A game that's linear has a very discrete fashion. It allows you to basically really solidify a gamer in whatever fiction you're trying to solidify them in, because they can't really break out of whatever rules that you've engaged in that part of the level. You're sort of there, and boom, you go off. You can sort of take it as some smaller places in Arkham Asylum, even though that's sort of an open prison game. But you go into an area maybe, and you're trying to take out different parts of the prison. You sort of know exactly where you need to go, A to B to C, and a lot of the gameplay revolves around sort of how you go about the same things everybody else is going to go about. I think that that would be the easiest way to describe it. And once you get into those areas, they're sort of rote. So what happens with an open hub game or a hub-based game that I like even more than open world is sometimes open world can get a gamer lost. We've all had this, or most of us have had it, where you enter an open world game, and when the blinders come off, and that's sort of the way you can describe it, where a linear game has the blinders right here, almost like horses in New York, you know, with their little shutters to stop them from seeing the cars and getting nervous. And then you go to a hub and it's like this, and then you go to an open world and they're completely removed. Where that's great, and it allows for some really flexible gameplay, rubber band gameplay in a way, it also, I would say, causes many game players to look and go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, really. And there's a lot of rules that bounce off each other in open world games that don't necessarily make sense in the real world, because that wouldn't make sense, but at the same time, they make sense in that game world, and it can take an incredible amount of learning. What's great about hub worlds, at least that I like, is many times a hub world is sort of introduced to you, or a hub area is introduced to you via either a cutscene or story telling you you're going there, and aligning some of those rules right away. You know, when I play GTA 5, for example, the game just starts. But many times when you're playing, let's say, a Mass Effect, and you go into the different planets, or you're playing a KOTOR, you go into the different planets, Dragon Age, many BioWare games have this, but a lot of other games do as well. You enter this area, and there's a cutscene, maybe some discussion, and it sort of aligns you with not necessarily exactly what you're supposed to be doing there, but sort of what you can do there. Sort of, you know, whether they say, oh, in this area it's pretty lawless. Okay, great. You know, you sort of get that idea. There isn't an invisible boundary you just passed where laws matter less. It's where they sort of tell you, hey, we're going to land in this hive of scum and villainy, and you can sort of get it. I like that about hub worlds. I also like about hub worlds the fact of it's a discrete location, and if it makes sense, if they do a good job of explaining it, it also allows you to make decisions that are freeform in the location without really breaking the narrative of somewhere else. Let me describe that. So in real life, if I was hated in a town, like a movie where, you know, the main bad guy's hated in a town, and, you know, he shut down the coal factory or whatever. It's like Risky Business, where the main bad guy like did these terrible things. Everybody knows who he is, but if he goes maybe to the next town, people don't know, and he can make different decisions there, and he can do different things. When you quit jobs, you may be known for something at one job, you go to another job, and you're not really known. You can reinvent yourself. In a way, that's what I like about hub world areas. You can sort of reinvent yourself. You know, occasionally you get somebody saying, I've heard of you, you're the shepherd that punched out the reporter, whatever. But overall, you're still able to make decisions, and you're able to make them in what I feel is a slightly more realistic way, which is taking into account what's actually occurring there, and then defining that with the alignment that you've chosen to play as that character. Or if you're just, you know, playing as somebody completely chaotic, I guess continuing that. And I like that about hub worlds. With open worlds, I really do like games like GTA, the Saints Rows, and so forth. But I find myself, after a while, sort of looking more towards the structured missions, because those allow me to sort of bounce off a little bit of what's going on in the game world and still get something done. It's one of the things that I think hub worlds and open worlds have difficulty with. In most open world games, reflecting the actions of game player back upon the game world is actually quite difficult. We see even companies like Microsoft with Crackdown trying to do on-cloud destruction, because you really want to make it make sense. Like, you're destroying this building. Well, do you keep that building there? And even they have had to change how they're going to actually do that game in the future and sort of pare it back a little bit. In open world games, it's just very hard, other than having people be like, yo, you're the badass, and maybe changing the color of something. An open world game is so massive that that becomes difficult. But less so in a hub world game. The Mass Effect games in particular, where you went into an area, you did particular things, and the starting area no longer looked like the starting area it had before, because maybe you've made it safer, maybe you've made it more dangerous, maybe you've destroyed an alien threat, maybe you've reinvigorated an alien threat, but you get to see those changes, and they're a little bit more reflected back upon the gamer. Now, this doesn't mean that no game's done this that's open world, and it certainly doesn't mean that every hub game and hub-based world game does this as well. It's not that. I'm just simply saying that's one of the reasons why I really like hub-based games and hub-based game worlds. You guys, one thing you'll find out about me is I'm just really big into the reflective states that games can offer us. Loading of levels is fine, and it's really cool for moving forward, like let's say a Doom game or something like that. But at some point when I look back, I want to see that I've made an impact. And if I haven't made an impact, which is also fine, let me explain. If I haven't made an impact, that's also okay as long as you explain why I haven't made an impact. And in fact, it could be very impactful if you had a game where it appeared for all instances or for all purposes that you had made a large number of impacts, and then at the end you find out none of them made an impact as long as they did it well. You know, we've all played that game where it's like, my last choice didn't matter. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a real good way of basically aligning that thought process of your choices didn't really change anything and really hammering that home in the story. That could be cool. Could be depressing as hell now that I think about it, but it could be cool. And I'm sure some people out there are like, well, this game does it. I'm sure you're right. You know, as one single person, I haven't been able to play all the games. So discussing a couple games I like, you'll notice that as I discussed what I like better, you know, mission-based, open world hub, or just true open world, you'll see that, you know, a lot of the games that I really like, including Alan Wake, sort of fit a particular way in which they demonstrate past and future and future and past, and that belief system in the timeline of a game's choices. I've always been a big fan of that. It's one of the reasons why I really like, when I do a walking the walk, looking at things like the separation of urban and rural areas, because in a lot of games, take for example Skyrim, you enter a game city, let's say, and when you walk in, there's maybe a couple guards at the door, but outside of that, maybe there's a mill, but there's no real signs of habitation. There's no real signs of there's a real transformation that happens when a city is developed, and that transformation from the rural and from the forest areas to an urban area can be quite telling and do a really good job of making you feel like you didn't just plop down the city. We've seen this in a lot of games where that's what it looks like, where it looks like somebody hit a button and they plopped down a city, and they built the city great, but outside the city, yeah, they sort of forgot that shit actually happens out there, that things that are lawless maybe shouldn't happen right outside the doors. And a lot of games still make this error. I really like the feeling of any game that makes you feel like there's a separation. Witcher 3, I discussed in the Walking the Walk. They're just such a great job they did of the separation of that rural and that urban. In fact, they did something great, and I never got a response on this. Actually, maybe I did get a response on this, but one of the things I brought up for Witcher 3 is there's a repair in a road in one particular area, and if you look to the right, I think, there is a fence, not a fence, I'm sorry, but a wall of stone, like an old, I don't know if it was a battlement or maybe just a separation of two people's property, but that stone texture is the same texture in the road. And it does this thing where it drives your thought process of, oh wow, the road was washed out, they needed to repair it quickly, they grabbed the stone from the wall over there. Was it just a texture artist using stone that was assigned to him for various different things in one particular area? Sure, could have been. It also could not have been. The best part of that is that you and I won't ever know unless they answer that question. I can't remember if they did, but I really like those kind of situations where there's that separation of rural and urban, but also a feeling of connectedness there. In that Walking the Walk, I talked about, you know, going and seeing a trail and that additional question mark of mystery. And that's going to bring me to the crux, I think, today of this little short video, which is, I was talking with Reg and Silver, and we were talking about different games and Go Burns, and I've always talked about my hatred for map mess. Whatever game it may be, I just really can't stand a lot of map mess. Map mess, if you don't know what I'm talking about, is when you open up a game world map and there's just fucking icons everywhere. It's just filled with icons from top to bottom, and you're looking at it going, holy shit, I don't really get it. But it's a mixture of not only map mess that really bothers me, but especially as of late, something that really breaks my immersion a lot. And this might be nitpicking for some people, but I want to describe to you why I think this way and why it bothers me. And it certainly wouldn't make or break a review, but why I think about it sometimes. You get games like Horizon Zero Dawn. Horizon Zero Dawn goes out of its way to define the past of the character, I feel. It goes out of its way to define the lineage of the character, whether that be good or bad, but it goes out of its way to really solidify you in this game world, in the traditions. It spends a lot of times explaining the habits of the people. I think these are very important, but I think when you don't reflect it in game mechanics, it can break a little bit. For example, how many games, including Horizon Zero Dawn, have we got where you don't know where the main fucking cities are in the game? You start the game and they're like, you've lived here for 21 years as a traveler and chopping wood, and yet you don't know where the big city is. You don't know where the small cities are. I'm waiting for a game that really removes that dissonance, and it is. That's really what it is. It's a very dissonant feeling, and they're trying to capture onto the feeling of discovery by putting a question mark so this town's found and so forth. What I really want is a game where it feeds into the player's knowledge. You know, is the player, for example, let's say you're doing a choose your own adventure game. I'm starting an RPG game. I was talking about choose your own adventure games just a little bit earlier. Let's say you're doing an RPG and you get to choose what you want to do. Well, let's say I choose Traveler or Explorer. Now, we've seen many RPGs where you choose fucking Traveler and Explorer and you start the game and the goddamn game doesn't tell you where anything is. You're a fucking Traveler or an Explorer. Do you know what would be even better? Is make those effects on the game world. Everybody's so scared of doing this. It's like, hey, we're going to give you a +2 to dexterity. Great. You know what I would like to do? Why don't you let me choose a quadrant of land that I know? What if I know faster ways between things? What if I know little secrets and hints about locations? What if I choose Explorer and I choose the north, which is the icy part of most games? And what if you basically generate a couple places that I know of there where there might be treasure or whatever? Give me an impact on the game world. You can't, when you start really looking at this, you can't believe how much dissonance there is in a game when a game goes out of its way to explain the form and the function of the history of an entire people, and then forgets the form and function and history of an entire people all at the same time, all within the same fucking character creation screen. It infuriates me. Does it really impact reviews? Not so much, but it's something that I will bring up. You'll hear me talk about more in a way of, man, I can't wait until somebody figures this kind of thing out. It's a situation where it's really hard to take, I guess, something seriously when it's all just a stat and it's not a game change. There's a lot of things that you could do in this game world, and especially now with the technology that we have, the power of these systems, the power of the PC, where you could make it to where if I chose something in character, you made some very real and vast changes to the way the game played. You know, a lot of people might look at alchemy and might say, well, in some games, if you have the alchemy skill, you can see a plant farther than somewhere else. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about, but I'm talking about for the more generalized stuff, and certainly the game world itself, because I feel that it's just not maximized. It's not even really close. It's actually quite painful. So jumping away from that for a second and looking at monetization and the Patron, you know, it's been a crazy couple days. A lot of people are like, oh man, he's doing fine because of the Patron. They don't really realize that taxes, fees, and of course Patron rewards that actually shirts and stuff like that actually go out all come out of that. So you get far less than that number. And I have some people who, great people, they all warned me, hey, I'm only given for 1 month, and they've come and gone. We have some people who are like, I only want 2 of these rewards. I don't want these 4. I want these 4. I don't want these 2. I don't want any rewards. I want them all, whatever. So there's all of this stuff that goes on. But I bring up Patron because, man, I was really sad to see that the Marvel vs. Capcom review had been demonetized. I was sad because you always hope that you know a reason for something, whatever that may be. You know, it's not you, it's me in a relationship, right? You're like, oh, God, here we go. That's sort of what happens right now with YouTube is, in a strange way, they're just constantly breaking up with people. And they're always saying it's actually you, it's not me, but they're not telling you what's wrong. And I find that that's just really painful. It's really difficult to deal with when you upload something and, you know, that can offset some of those expenses. That can offset getting more games for people. It can offset doing a contest. It can offset just the stress and worry of trying to make sure that, you know, everything is done on this weird, strange timeline that is really quite artificial and quite busy. As you guys know, I'm a very busy person. And you upload something and they demonetize it in the busy section for the first 2 days and then remonetize it when it's no longer getting views. And, you know, some of us have been like, this has to be on purpose, because there's no better way for YouTube to save money than to say, we're only demonetizing the things that matter, and you can just fight back, and we'll certainly remonetize it if it's good to go. But what happens is they give themselves, strangely enough, the exact same amount of hours that most videos have to get their most views, which is 48. Very odd stuff. It's very painful for a lot of people. You know, looking at Dreamcast guy, he's got some, Mr. Matty's been hammered like a son of a bitch, man. He's got some that are just, you're just sitting there looking at some of the videos going, why is this demonetized? Lone Volt Wanderer, who I do the Ham Radio podcast with Matty as well. He's got his. Go Burns has had some demonetized. And there's just no form or function or rhyme or reason. You know, the Total Biscuit video was a good example of that. I uploaded three versions total. The first one demonetized. The second one, which had one particular sentence replaced by me saying YouTube sucks, monetized. The third is the same as the first, monetized. So there's obviously a problem there. There's obviously a very distinct issue that goes on. And, you know, it's certainly not always related to screenshots, because mine a lot of times are a headphone. Many times mine are games. Even TB, when he was on the channel, he was like, you got Minecraft demonetized? Like, what the hell? None of these make sense. And none of them do make sense. When you look at what of mine gets demonetized, you'll find ones where I don't cuss, don't make any innuendos, whatever. They might get demonetized. And then something else where I'm just dropping F-bombs doesn't get demonetized at all. And it's really painful for somebody who's creating something to have to deal with that. And the reason why is because you create it and you hope it hits a certain number of people. And there's an excitement there where that creation is, I think, rewarded with viewers and with the monetization that YouTube has. You know, if YouTube was never monetizing, then I don't think a lot of people would have an issue, because it was just never monetizing. But once you do enact sort of a status quo on your delivery and then you break that randomly without telling people, that causes an issue regardless, whether it's a legal position or not. I mean, it's really, I think that's a moot point, whether it's you know, legal or not. It's just a situation that that sucks for all involved and makes it quite difficult for small creators. I had a lot of people who I've helped now. I think my 16th channel, Patron, who they patron, and I sit down with them and we look at channels. Sounds German. We looked at his. We looked at a ton of others, and we sort of, or I do, and I sort of identify, you know, things that I've run into, mistakes I've run into, things that they could change, tags, so forth. But you never really know if that's going to help them, because what if everything they do, what if they do all that and they get demonetized anyway? You know, people say, oh, you should go to another channel. Well, I went to Vassal. I'm on VidMe. I'm on Mixer. I've done Twitch. None of them have ever paid off. And, you know, YouTube, that's the one thing that for the longest amount of time, it did pay off fairly well. We still had some issues, but as TB told me, you know, in the past, there were times where the advertisers just didn't pay at all. And that was really terrible. Like, you'd get paid one time and then not the other. At least that doesn't happen now. But that demonetization is really painful to watch. I have a lot of people who now are emailing me. I have one person that I know for a fact they're not going to do YouTube. And I think that their brand of information that they would have delivered to gamers was quite worth actually having them on YouTube. A lot of people will just say, oh, well, you know, go and get a real job, whatever. Sorry, I've had real jobs. I've pulled Green Chain. If you don't know what the fuck that is, it's considered one of the top 5 hardest physically demanding games, or demanding jobs. And it's the amount of time and work and effort and mental exhaustion that can go into YouTube. I'm sure some of these people are really tired, or Twitch or so forth. It can be very tiring mentally to continue that puzzle all day long. And especially then you go home and it's demonetized. It's an odd thing. So talking about patrons, how's everything been going? Well, you know what? It's been going great. Oh, got new shirts. This one is characters look like a balloon animal's prison bitch. That was, I can't remember what game review I explained a character looking like that. But I've got the Proverbs shirts, which are different sayings that I've had in games that just random patrons have been like, I would really like a shirt where it shows like that and shows you. So we put those up on, what is it? Let's see. It's on Redbubble and it's on Teespring. So under ACG. That's been working out really well. Hasn't sold a ton. That's not really what it's about. It's certainly about me being able to give them to the patrons, because some of the patron rewards have shirts. So it's been really fun there. I've sold a couple, but it's more me buying and then giving to the patrons, which has been a blast to sort of see them. And there's multiple designs there. That's been fun. You know, that's been something enjoyable. The B movie night has been great. That is, you know, it's hard to get that together because there's people from all over the world now. We had somebody who Brazil was like, hey, I'm a big fan. We had somebody in fucking Burrow, Alaska, who's like, dude, I watch everything you do. You've got them everywhere. And so there's different time zones. So the B movie night's quite difficult, but we're putting one together for Wednesday. That'll be fun. I'll have a bunch of you guys in there. We just sit down and, you know, grab some popcorn and sit back and watch a movie. And it's been so great to do so. You know, whether you think it's like a mystery science fiction theater, mystery theater, whatever, it's not even really like that. It's just like a bunch of people sitting down at a person's house watching a movie together. It's worked out really well. Probably one of the most fun things I've had. What about gaming with patrons? Well, that's been a blast too. It's hard to do because a lot of patrons don't have the games I have, or I don't have the games they have, but we usually get it aligned as well as we can. And recently did Divinity Original Sin 2 and did a little D&D mode. That was a blast. That worked out really well. It's been very fun to do. There's a D&D game we're talking about inside of Patron as well, where we may do an online D&D game. If you don't know what that is, you can check out Critical Role on YouTube. They'll show you. Probably won't be doing dress up since we'll all be at home, and that would be weird. But most likely we'll do a role-playing game. I just have to get everything solidified. A lot of people have asked me, you know, where do I see the channel? Where do I hope the channel will be? In all honesty, I'm just trying to get everything to some kind of status quo, right? To something that I can look and go, okay, this is the average, plus or minus even, I mean, plus or minus a large amount, whatever, that I'm going to get each month from YouTube and from Patreon. So I can sort of identify how to move forward and what I want to concentrate on. One of the things I described in the Patreon video is just how difficult it is to identify what to pattern onto and what people like versus what new people like that maybe won't patron, but they'll watch all your videos. And they'll be like, you know, I can't give you any money, but I'm going to, you know, I'll watch all your videos or whatever. And you're like, okay, well, thank you. But that serves a different purpose than something else, because subscribers now is great, but many times their views won't count because videos are demonetized. So it's a very weird situation. So with the Patron, it's been a blast. Been trying to do as much as I can, get that information out there. I know some people are like, man, Patron gives me a lot of alerts. I'm just going to say this. Whenever you're ready to get pissed that Patron gave you the third alert about a B movie in a 3-week period or whatever, usually it's not more than that. Just remember that it helps the channel. It helps me. And that a little bit of dealing with an extra email is, I get that it could be bothersome, but just delete it and move on. I had a couple people who were like, there's too many auto notifications on Patreon, I'm leaving. And I'm all, dude, you could have just hit the delete button. Like, I mean, is the lack of, or is the identity crisis that you may have so worth it that you want to leave, you know, versus just hitting delete? It just seems really odd to me. So I just wanted to give that warning out there. I know a lot of people bring it up. And I'm going to do a behind the scenes about reviews. Let's talk about that for a second. This is going to be short, and then we'll end up this video. You know, when it comes to reviews, there's a lot of information that I think we all have that's different because we're different styles of reviewers or video makers. So you'll have some people say, I'm rushed on all my reviews. You'll have somebody say, I'm not rushed on any of my reviews. You have some people say, I'm treated like this from a company. Others say, I'm treated like this. And there is a vast and wide spectrum there. I will be doing a behind the scenes for videos about how I deal with reviews, how I go about them, everything from the embargo to the writing. It's a big behind the scenes, very cool. I've got a lot of good ideas. Of course, just like this, it'll be just free form, me talking to the camera. But I got some good ideas I'm going through in my mind. And I want to sort of present to people some of the knowledge I have of how it works for me. I hear a lot of people say, man, you do a lot of reviews, or man, you're working all the time. Working all the time, for sure. A lot of reviews, there's a lot, but it's actually not as many as I think people, you know, I don't want people to be like, okay, he's not working very hard. I am, but when it comes to the amount of videos, it's not as bad as people think, especially when you assume, like, maybe if I do a Telltale review, it's a 2-hour game. 2 hours. That's less time than I could take watching a couple episodes of a TV show I like. So it's something I want to talk about. I want to talk about the embargoes, about business structure, about companies and how they deal with things. Of course, not dropping any names, because that's not what this is about. This is just about giving you guys an idea of how a channel works behind the scenes, and how you know, creation and cultivated content really gets out to you guys, because I think that that's probably one of the most important things, so that people can understand where it's coming from. I've had people argue with me and say, you know, I don't agree with this, but I don't agree with this end result, but I like your review or whatever. That's the kind of stuff I really care about, because they sort of understand where I'm coming from, and it feels like I've done a good job. That's what I want to do with this review behind the scenes, is make sure that people, when they leave, they go, okay, for Karak himself, this is how it works, and sort of deal with it from there. The last thing I want to talk about is, you know, personal stuff outside of games. So I always talk about this in the podcast, and people seem to really like it. It's fun to do so. You know, airsoft is a big deal to me. It's physical, get you out there, get you moving. We don't get to do it as much as I'd like. I would love a weekly game. We're nowhere near that, but it's certainly an enjoyment that I have. And I think my other thing is, you know, if I'm not doing video game reviews, if I'm not doing hardware reviews, a lot of times I'm watching TV shows. I really like to watch. I really like to imbibe just different shows of all kinds. For example, right now we're watching just a terrible show called Salvation on Amazon Prime. Terrible. It's about a supposed asteroid hitting the Earth and people preparing for it and trying to, you know, bounce it away from Earth. And the acting's bad, but sometimes those are some of my favorite things in the world, is just sit back and be like, man, this is bad, and sort of tease on it, riff on it. Not tease on the people, but just sit back and be like, man, this is just bad acting. This is just not a good plot, whatever. And I've really, really enjoyed that. I'm rewatching Eureka, rewatching Fringe, both at the same time, and I'm finishing up Narcos. With Narcos, it's one of those shows that I didn't think I would like. I like the situations and stuff, but I find it a little bit bothersome to constantly have to read subtitles, and that a lot of that movie or TV shows in Spanish. But it's great to sit back, and I really, really dig the characters in that show. It's been fantastic to watch, to sort of understand the crime. And that's a time when I was, you know, growing up as a child, a very young child, and I still remember some of those news bits hitting the news that they're talking about in that show. And that's always fun to remember back and go, oh yeah, when I was a kid, I saw Ronald Reagan and Nancy talk about say no to drugs and stuff like that on TV. So very cool stuff. That's it for me. This is a somewhat shorter. It's probably 40 minutes or so. I just wanted to cover a little bit about what's going on the channel and just some random thoughts for me. I hope you guys like the video. This will be Patron only for a little bit of time, and then I'll push it out to everybody else. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.